some discussions. And if we're following the agenda here, I think it is, I've touched on the goals and discussions, so those are maybe, all combined here, but we can address things as people have questions or comments.
I have a question. Nancy Galvan with Unica again. As a priority, I'd like to see something addressing women-owned businesses in the city. Just the fact that, even around this table, we're at a minority, so it'd be good if we had some kind of initiative to promote or even help develop women-owned businesses. And I'd gladly like to spearhead that if you need somebody.
This is Bobby Adier from Texas A&M. The three things I'd mention, maybe all related to your point about storytelling. So one is, I wonder whether part of our distinctive story might be something around, even within Texas, what Fort Worth stands for in this regard. And reference to it is when I had been here about a year and a half, I made the observation to a longtime Texan, and I said, it's so amazing how entrepreneurial Texas is and Texans are, and their response was, no, it's not, like we're not. Was their pushback. They said Texas's success in some ways is notwithstanding that we don't do as much of that as we might hope for statewide. So as part of our distinctive story, if we can build this narrative about Fort Worth, that's a real winning story, that if we are the hub of entrepreneurship and innovation and the like in the state of Texas, and it's not to try and compete with Austin because they may not be doing that entrepreneurial piece as much either. So that's one. Second one, I do think it's useful to think about, are there particular areas where we want to try and foster and encourage this entrepreneurial activity? It should be broad-based, the opportunity should be there, but we might want to think about targeting efforts or seeding efforts in certain areas where we think we'll see greatest success is one. Second one, and then the third one is, I'm thinking about some of the initiatives in the K through 12 context. Is it worth it to think about an education subcommittee? Because that could be a real innovative thing if we are doing something systematically with entrepreneurship across our K through 12 schools, whether public, private, whatever else it is. So maybe something of that sort.
Guys, Les Cruz, I just want to follow that real quick with, I think I like the storytelling aspect, this being a facilitator, like this organization being a facilitator. I think that where we tell the story is actually kind of being interesting. I don't know how to solve that problem. Like, what's the channel in this community? I feel pretty disconnected in Fort Worth because I don't really know where the information comes from. So maybe we can innovate a way to solve that problem. I don't know what it is, but I feel very disconnected because I really don't read the Star Telegram anymore. And that's how I used to get all my news. So that is a problem that needs to be solved. And then on the other thing is the tech side of things. I'm going to pound the table. This is my big deal. Is if 85% of venture capital is currently invested in technology in some form, that's the future. That's the future tellers, right? And so I really think that your storytelling has got to use the words tech in it a lot, because I think you've got to change the narrative in the city. So I think that's really important for this group to understand.
So Councilman, if I could jump in, as I listen to the introductions and kind of think about the bios, obviously a fantastic group of people. Could we take a step back and think of entrepreneurship in buckets? So you've got what I would call small size entrepreneur, medium size, and then you've got, the big grand entrepreneur opportunities. And so if we look at it from that standpoint, I would venture to say that there are opportunities where VC may not be interested in small entrepreneurship, maybe more mid-sized to large, but perhaps we have the opportunity to change that, okay? Because what I believe is the case is that there's a greater upside for small and medium entrepreneurship than larger entrepreneurship. That's just from my vantage point. So I want to just kind of put that on the table for consideration, because I think that what we don't want to do is we don't want to overlook opportunities where I think they're the greatest potential for upside, because we think that tech, and no disrespect to tech, because we think that tech is where the bulk of resources are going to go for entrepreneurial opportunities. Because you know, tech is great, but you also need a lot of other types of businesses in an entrepreneurial lens to help make a community thrive. And I think what we ultimately want is a entrepreneurial ecosystem that has balance and that can yield rewards in a variety of different ways. So I would just offer that as some thoughts as to how we view this process and where we think we can really lend our collective talents to move the needle. Secondarily, and in my light reading, I think we all have to take into account that many gains that were made pre-COVID from an entrepreneurial standpoint, we've lost. And so that presents another set of challenges, particularly as it relates to access to capital, access to resources, for those who may have lost their business opportunities to try to pursue or re-engage those opportunities, if at all possible. So it's all very complex. I'm here to do my part and then some. But I think if we think in terms of buckets or categories of entrepreneurship and how can we effectively work to enhance those, and how do we deploy our talents and resources around that, I think that would be worthy of this group's time and thought process.
I think, did you want to go? All right. I just want to share a couple thoughts. One thought that I think might be helpful for us is to define a North Star statement, which ironically can be the hardest part of my experience, is like a simple thesis statement. But I say this from my experience being in New York, and I'll just share that I have a lot of more love, candidly, for Fort Worth than I did for my 15 years in New York. But I also happen to live in New York in a period when New York moved from being a mainly finance, media-dependent city to a more tech, but I'm gonna caveat the tech point city. And it happened first because there was a crisis, which was the financial crisis, when they realized they were not gonna get the tax dollars. I actually believe we sit here at a moment of crisis for Fort Worth that's COVID related, but I actually think that crisis could be our opportunity to capitalize on it. And in New York, when the financial crisis hit, their North Star statement, I have this from a while back, was build a talent engine that makes the city a magnet for coders and companies. And I would love us to come up with something as similar, concise. There was a lot in that statement, even though it sounds simple, with actually what that meant for how they move forward. For example, they created an X Prize on Roosevelt Island that was bid out to become the top tech, all the top tech colleges were bidding on it, and that was city land, and that's how they had a talent engine, was they thought it depended on schooling starting. But then a lot of other stuff came from that. But I'll tell you, the entire New York ecosystem, from my experience, started with that one statement. And so I guess I would advocate if we could work on a North Star, maybe that's under the marketing approach of like, what is our North Star statement that we hold ourselves as the thing we want to move the needle on? And with that, I just want to go back to your point on tech, because in some ways I do agree, but there's one nuance from my experience I feel pretty strongly about, which is I actually think we're at a point in time where every company is a tech company. And if you look at the companies out here, even if it doesn't feel like it yet, Pizza Hut, massive gains in the S&P because it became a tech company for delivering pizzas. Even waste management can be delivered by tech. The line is very thin now. Peloton, is that a hardware company or a tech company? Like there's Uber, is that a massive black car company or a tech company? Most people probably say tech, but the line is getting thinner and thinner. And so I think it's more about tech enablement. And so we can unpack that, but there's a lot of ways I think we could become the tech enablement hub. And post-COVID, from my experience in the tech world, I also think we have a massive opportunity because of the proximity that is in the deck about transportation across the country is actually the same for executives. I've got teams in New York and I have teams in California, and I love living in Fort Worth, not living in either one of those cities, but I can commute to them very quickly. So I think we actually have a COVID-based opportunity too on tech. So But number one thing is North Star for me. We got to come up with a North Star statement to know what we hold ourselves to do, I think.
Oh, here we go. I just want to add to that. I think that's a very good point in relation to New York City. I remember there was areas in Brooklyn, actually, just across the bridge that were derelict, and New York made a very big effort to invest in them, and they became a place for entrepreneurs and coders. And so I think it'd be a very good idea to do some case studies on other cities, cities we're competing with, right? Because we have Dallas and McKinney and other mid-cities that we're competing with, and what they're doing. So some form of a competitor analysis. And then I think there's other case studies within the US, like how did they, Palo Alto, like there's certain things we can take. It's not one size that fits all, but there is good, there has been successful cities, and I think we should, do that scan across and to see what they're doing right and what the gotchas were, so we can avoid those too.
Kit, who came up with the North Star statement?
The story, and I've got more of that story we can share because we kind of studied it when I was in the venture capital world there, and FirstMark was very involved with building out, I can just tell you, building out New York, because they were one of the two first venture capital firms in New York at a time when no one thought you could do venture capital in New York. Everyone was in Silicon Valley, so they actually were one of the first two. So that statement was a committee that Bloomberg suggested be formed, who then met, who then created first the North Star statement, then met and then said, how do we move the needle on the North Star statement, which triggered a bunch of activities, one of which was the X Prize that became Roosevelt Island is kind of held as a top one, but there, I can document it, there's more than that. There were community building opportunities for, at the time, developers to learn skills. So like whatever, like new Java at the time, but like coding academies where you felt like you could show up for a coffee and meet people who could talk and teach you that. The other big driver, which I'm not sure I know enough about Fort Worth to apply it, was the city invested between helping their existing industries to become tech companies, even if they were not at the time. How do we take, and I happened to be at one, I guess, I was at Weight Watchers. So Weight Watchers, retail, business, historically launching an online platform for the first time. How does the city help someone like Weight Watchers at the time become tech enabled, supporting them with advisors and so on? And so that was a good example.
Yeah, I would just echo that too. I think that's one thing Fort Worth is missing, is that kind of North Star statement. I was in Kansas City for about 5 years when they declared themselves America's most entrepreneurial city. And at the beginning, it was kind of a joke. It was like, really? Haha, that's funny, Kansas City. But what it turned into over time was a battle cry. And as entrepreneurs got started, as entrepreneurs had success, as Techstars came to town, and some of these other things started to kind of roll up, everybody could kind of point to, that mission statement on the wall that said, maybe we really are America's most entrepreneurial city. So it became this battle cry. It became this aspirational thing that a lot of people could kind of rally around and gather around and work together to achieve. Entrepreneurship is a team sport, and we've kind of all got to get engaged and get involved. So I think it's a great idea. We got to figure out what Fort Worth's version of that is. Take what New York did, take what Kansas City did, figure out what Fort Worth's version of it is, and then begin to tell that story. And then hopefully it's kind of an aspirational statement. If we can point to examples we have today, but then let's go create those next examples.
I would say that Kansas City, if you look at the numbers of new jobs they create each year from this entrepreneurship community, it's 16,000 new jobs organically created every year from entrepreneurship. It's a big deal. I think this, what we're doing here, is really important.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think where I see a lot of organic growth is engaging larger organizations, our established businesses here, and having them, asking them, what would you love to buy here in Fort Worth that you have to go somewhere else to buy, right? Because it would lower your costs if you could buy it here, right? So to Marcus's point about focusing on small business here, what is it where our medium-sized businesses need from small businesses, but those small businesses aren't here? In other words, engaging with our existing businesses, give me 3 things that you hate to source somewhere else. And let's figure out if we can source them here. Let's figure out if we can connect you with an entrepreneur, an idea and an entrepreneur here on the ground to create that from the bottom up, a very small business. So, and that goes into Kansas City's point that Les and Cameron were making, was that you're creating businesses from within.
Well, I think as a follow-up, I think that's where there's an opportunity for VC to navigate differently, and maybe create a subset where you're really, honing in on those type of small to medium-sized entrepreneurial opportunities that heretofore had not maybe had the same kind of appeal. And I get it, you want to maximize returns, right? But maybe there's a means by which we can help facilitate those types of opportunities.
Right. It's an environment, I think, where you bring existing businesses that have a need. You bring capital providers that want to invest in a new company, and you bring those entrepreneurs that have the time and the desire to create that supply for the customer need. I think fostering that environment here through connections, through open forums, but it's engaging with existing businesses that are too busy to sort of vertically integrate and solve that problem, but would love to find somebody to do it for them.
Andrew's point about going to the companies with that question, which I think is a great one, to mind another possibility, is that can we identify companies in town, the larger companies that for their own employees want to foster kind of a culture of entrepreneurship? And I'm thinking back to the storytelling, that if Fort Worth is a city where even the big entities that are very different in your third bucket, right, nonetheless, they see value in this and they want to foster it. And the city is helping them in some ways create the structures for fostering entrepreneurial business creation, innovation, whatever, maybe particularly women employees, whatever else it is. That could be a great part of a story about why Fort Worth is, again, different, because these big companies, they're focused on their own employees also becoming entrepreneurs of that sort.
I just wanted to add on to that. I like your idea of buckets, because I think the needs for a small business are different than a larger business. Also, I think Texas does a great job of attracting large businesses because there's no state tax. But what are we doing to grow our own? And I really like the idea of seeking what large businesses need and seeing how we can grow our own to foster the needs of those larger businesses. Also, there's a great resignation going on. We've had several folks leave the airport, and they're not retiring. They're starting their businesses. So we brought in resources to help them start their business for whatever they want to do. So there's a pool out there of people that are wanting to go into business and excited about going into business. And how do we tap into that talent and help them grow their businesses? But when you're talking about growing your own locally, are there barriers? We do a fantastic job of bringing huge companies in here, offering incentives, no state tax. But are there barriers that keep folks from growing their business? If we look internally, do we make it harder to get this license? Do we make it harder to get this? Is it too expensive? So I'd really like to look at, have we removed all the barriers for small businesses or anyone that wants to start a business or grow their business? And I also wanted to add, I like the woman. I'll tag minority onto that.
Any other thoughts? Yeah, go ahead, Ian.
I'd say one briefly from us, for me. I would say we've had a lot of success with becoming laser focused on specific, I would say, niches within the market. So whenever we started Alliance, the story was always aviation focused, but that really grew with a few different groups. And with this Mobility Innovation Zone and what I work on, what we found is attracting and helping to tell the story of Alliance, Texas, and Fort Worth and Tarrant County, North Texas, really spoke well to the long-haul autonomous trucking community, so a very specific niche. A lot of that was freight density in North Texas. A lot of that was just the existing logistics space here, highway infrastructure, everything we talk about. What that's started to build is an ecosystem within that. So all the components that go into an autonomous truck, it's, you obviously got your main truck, but you also have your radars, your LiDARs, your sensor stacks. and then there's the community of people that need to support that industry, and that's a growing industry. So I think that's something that we really found has been interesting, and kind of building that kind of, what's your kind of North Star, I guess, that's attracting a lot of other businesses with it, and working to find those and identify those early. So that's us.
Well, to me, the hard part is deciding, right? So we've got innovation and mobility, we've got huge pharma, we've got tech, we've got, these big pieces. How do you synthesize that down and say, this is the North Star without alienating anyone? Or, you know what I mean? Or believing that we're forgetting about any of those buckets, because we obviously don't want to.
It's Jonathan Balch, Alcon. I think it's why either the charter or the priority objectives or the North Star is so important, and spending time really saying what the council chairs and the mayor want out of this group, because I think collectively we could solve a lot of problems, but the scope is daunting, and it's hard for me to understand if we're talking about a PR campaign and development for the city, or if we're really trying to support grassroots entrepreneurship. And both can coexist, but I think you need to be clear if both are in scope or one is more important than the other. It's my sense. Yeah.
Any thoughts on that? Bobby?
I was just going to say that again, to your framing of it, I do think, one of the ways you do that is you have a broad North Star, but then you're identifying what are areas where we think there's early wins or early opportunities for us to pursue. And those are not exclusive, because we know and expect that over time, we become known for entrepreneurship generally across a variety of areas, even tech, or to your point that everything is tech, that's sort of across all of these areas. But we recognize that these two verticals, or these three verticals, are areas where we see more opportunity in the near term. And as we succeed in those, then that list gets longer and longer. So that may be one way to think about it.
Yeah, I like that. And I absolutely agree with you, Jonathan. And to me, in my mind, it was, what's our swim lane here? What are the actionable things that we can identify that we can, grade our success? And where do we look to without, forgetting about the greater goal? And I just don't know how to balance that. Mayor, do you have any thoughts?
No, I'm observing.
Okay. All right. Sure.
Okay, one more little story why I kind of believe that every company becomes a tech company. One thing I've seen, I have been truly amazed moving here to New York. I do think the entrepreneurship is incredible. I have so many friends and people I've met here who started their own companies. From my experience being in technology for my career, at times I feel like they're missing knowing what technology could do for their business. So whether it be a friend that now has a rug company that she mainly sells on Instagram, realizing that if she built a different version of the website, that could scale massively if she wants it to. Or someone who just opened up the Plant Grow Shop, which happens to be on Camp Bowie as a new enter. There's literally, and I'm blanking right now, a VC-backed startup that's an online plant grow shop that tells you how to take care of your plants and sends them to you. What's the difference between the two? There's almost nothing. But the difference is that the founder of the Plant Grow Shop in New York City is in an ecosystem where someone says, why don't you put it online this way? Why don't you make it a subscription business? Or I'm making it up. I don't know waste management yet, but waste management, why is it not some different subscription business where you can opt into how many times your trash gets taken? I'm not even sure what, but there's an ecosystem that surrounds almost every business. I don't think I've seen a single business that I cannot make up a way that it could be tech enabled if that entrepreneur wants their business to be tech enabled. And so that is something I really believe is the kind of the missing ingredient in the ecosystem right now. And my last thought being in this market is the New York statement, it said, build a talent engine, be a magnet for coders. At the time, that meant engineers, that meant developers, was the meaning of that. And everyone thought that developers was the most important skill set to build. I partially believe that. there's actually a skill set, which is the new most important and most in demand skill set, which is called a product owner or a product manager, depends the company. The product people are the ones at Google, at Meta, who literally decide what you build, and more engineering talent is being outsourced more remotely, other countries, other locations, especially with the rise of COVID. So I know this is a detailed, like I get that you have to be in tech to maybe, these are nuances, but there is a changing tech landscape that's also happening that's leaning into product people, which I personally believe there's like a North Star statement of attracting the product talent, who are the people that could walk up to the grocery shop and say you should make it online. But I know I'm going to the weeds.
No, that's terrific, because if we're talking about product people, that's certainly a much wider net of folks and literally their products. Okay.
Kate, you mentioned, it's Kate, right? Yeah. You mentioned coding like 10 times, right? So I think it's something to consider that is an important skill set for the future workers, right? So you mentioned education as being part of this group. Like, why are we not considering how do we get coding as part of the educational system? Like, that's something we should be teaching in high school. Like, my parents took shop because we were an industrial nation, right? So in an industrial nation, you had to work machines, right? Now we're in a technology world. So the kids need to come out of school understanding what coding is, because the future generations are going to have to know how to code, coming out of the city. So I think it's something to consider. Like, how do we get coding into Fort Worth Independent School District?
So a follow-up to that is, and perhaps the opportunity to invite the most appropriate person from certainly Fort Worth ISD, but if there could be a representative that can maybe speak to us about what curriculum, if any, that they're using to help promote entrepreneurship. I mean, obviously, most of us are familiar with STEM education, but what does that really look like present day? And then how does that potentially funnel up to higher education or trade or tech schools? That might be helpful for us to understand contextually what's happening at the K through 12 level, because I mean that's very important.
Right, and providing for your family to trying to scale a business for an IPO, their aspirations, they're equally relevant and equally important. So how do we tie those things together? And feel like we're ultimately creating an environment in a city where people do feel confident that the city's got their back, that we are actually helping where we can help, and that speaks to some of our departments that we're constantly looking for ways to innovate, and that's been a big initiative of the mayors. How do we streamline? How do we introduce tech into government? And, again, do our part. That certainly would be, an aspirational goal. Go ahead, Michael.
I think what I hear you saying, we're on the same page, is to tag on to what you're saying, of by nature of this, having been in government and done government in and out of government for a long period of time, the nature of putting this group together is sort of an oxymoron with entrepreneurship and innovation, because it can become a government quagmire very, very quickly. I'm glad to get some laughs there. But I think we have the same goals about cutting through that bureaucracy, figuring out ways to help. And we've talked about it before, but government can't solve all the problems. It's people around this table, people here, people in the room that are setting up businesses I know that want to solve the problem. So that's what I want to see out of this. You keep saying low-hanging fruit, et cetera, that same idea, that what ideas can we come out with here that y'all can help us with to make sure we're doing right for everybody, having all voices at the table that we can, and being practical in our solutions. So that's what I'm hopeful to get out of this from y'all, of how we're going to do that and help our entrepreneurs, our innovators that are here, that are looking for us to help, but we need y'all to help us do that. So I just want to add on to that, what you're saying there.